Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years. Pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world. Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. This week is a podcast that I think is unlike anything I have ever recorded. This podcast is essentially a talk among friends. Shannon Crow is on, and let me give you a short backstory about how this podcast came to happen. Shannon and I are friends in real life, and she has a podcast of her own, the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. Now, we have known each other and sat at tables together and discussed hard things when we could see each other and read each other's body language while in the same space. And she and I hadn't really connected in several months when she reached out via Instagram to chat. And the result of that reach out was a hard conversation, but it was also an impactful conversation. And we decided to go back and record something just like it for both of our podcasts. So this is a bit longer chat, and I'm going to skip all the stuff that I usually do at the beginning this week and welcome you all to Shannon and I's brains and our friendship. Here is my conversation with Shannon Crow.
Also, I don't know how we're doing the intro now that I've just started the recording.
I mean, hey, everybody.
Like normally, here's how I do my recording. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Rebecca. It's so great to have you back.
Thank you. And welcome to Working in Yoga, Shannon. It's great to have you back. That covers
like
everybody.
When we podcasted too much together and we just have this friend chat that I forget the details. Okay.
Dear listeners, this is not for you. This is our conversation.
To the listeners?
Yeah. You're just listening to our conversation today.
That's what it's going to be like. It's just going to be like a chat because I feel like we touched on some really great things. And I feel like you had this idea of like, Shannon, let's talk about this on a podcast. And I was like, yes. Now maybe you and I are both like too eager to put it on a podcast. I don't think so. I think we learn a lot from private conversations through friends about tough things. Okay, so do you want to summarize like kind of how we got here to having this tough conversation or like our conversation the other day to catch people up?
Yeah, I mean, I'll do a little bit of an overview summary. And since you reached out to me, then you can do your summary as well. But I would think so. Essentially, to sum it up, friends, Shannon and I had a really amazing conversation last week, and it was just a delight to connect, and we hadn't connected for a while. And we were talking about hard topics. In this particular conversation, we were talking about the Palestinian genocide, but there are lots of hard topics that happen in our yoga spaces. And so I was, essentially at the end, I was like, I'm so proud of us. We should talk about what it is to have hard conversations in yoga spaces, because oftentimes those conversations do happen and you see either people, there's a lot of clustering of people who have like-minded beliefs together having those conversations, unwilling to talk to other people, or you have people in yoga spaces saying, I don't want to have that conversation at all. Yoga's not for this. And I disagree with both of those things. Like, God, do I love a hard conversation. Like, it allows me to get to know people who I love better. So you and I have one of those, and I thought, let's just talk about that. Your turn.
I love this. That was such a good summary. What would I add to it? Well, I think I would add to it and own up to this that like I've been feeling pretty triggered by I've been feeling triggered by the yoga world for a long time.
It's not to be triggered by, honestly. We'd really.
And this whole like, you know, also learning about it and then maybe a part of it is like maybe I'm a little triggered by former Shannon, the yoga teacher, who knew nothing about like cultural appropriation and um, all the things that sort of Western yoga has done to sort of that's pretty harmful, can be harmful. Toxic positivity, just saying like, don't even look at the news, just sit here and meditate. Yeah, there are a lot of things that kind of get under my skin, and then I feel like I was feeling triggered, or maybe I was feeling um like I was questioning. I was like, Rebecca's on the same page as me with social justice. I know that we have sat like physically in spaces where
Yeah.
you and I are talking about cultural appropriation and the yoga world. And I'm like, yes, yes. And like that sense of community. And then all of a sudden, maybe it was like, gosh, maybe, maybe I trusted in this sense of community and it's not what I thought it was. And so I feel like I was like reactive in a message to you and like, bah, bah, bah.
And honestly, I mean, and one thing, this is something that I think I love about being in my 40s is to have enough knowledge to be able to go back and say, oh yeah, I messed up in a message. You and I had gone back and forth, and gosh, what was this, like December, like probably November, December time? We'd been going back and forth about something. And you typically do voice messages, which I love because I love your voice, right? It's just incredible. And I am not that person. I am almost always the person who types out. And I thought after we got off this phone call last week, like, of course I said some stupid shit while I was talking instead of typing, because I oftentimes am thinking in like a writer's mind. And I was like, I said some stupid shit and it was dumb. It was a comment that was dumb and it was not appropriate for the situation. And like, you were correct to be like, oh, I don't know how to take that. And then we kind of separated for a while. Like, you and I haven't communicated for probably 6 months, which is unlike us. We generally are pretty chatty together. And then you commented on one of my, Instagram stories about Trello, because of course Trello brings us together. This podcast is not sponsored by Trello, but and we started chatting again. Yeah.
Yeah. And gosh, I'm so grateful for the chat and also the safety of knowing that I can't like I could reach out to you and I said, "Hey, can we have a chat?" Cuz I was like, this has gone on long enough. Like I'm just stewing with like whatever and I have more questions than answers with like what happened, how did we get here? What are your thoughts? And the minute we started talking, I was like, "Oh, I realized that like I brought some baggage from other conversations where people were like saying very harmful things. And I brought that with me into this thinking, okay, maybe Rebecca is feeling the same way as these other people. And I was wrong about it. Like my guess of like how you were feeling about it was wrong.
Well, I mean, first of all, here's what I want to say to you is that can we give like former Shannon a ton of grace here? Like, look, former Rebecca has also done some weird stuff. like she's been in marriages that weren't good. She has said some out of pocket stuff in her time. And for those of us who feel passionately about things, especially in this space, we're going to talk about social justice things, but things in general, like, I mean, people are really passionate about Young Living essential oils too. Like, you can say, like, really out of pocket things when you're passionate about something. And then you learn later on, like, oh, I should have caught a bubble there and maybe step back a little bit. Like, let's give you like a ton of grace, and I mean, hopefully we can extend that to both of us, because yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that I think is the basis of any difficult conversation, is like we're going to assume the best about the other person.
Yes. Oh gosh, and I hope our listeners also extend this to themselves. And I'm telling
Yeah.
you, like, it felt so good during the conversation from my side. I can say, like, I was just like, first of all, let's focus on connecting. Like, how are you? What have you been up to? Like, let's connect as friends. Like, what's going on in your life? That felt really good. And then being like, okay, can we can we chat about this thing? Like, here's how I was
Yeah.
feeling. Like to dive right in. And then finishing and being like, okay, we are on the same page. That doesn't mean that we're going to agree about every single thing. You
No,
know, what if
probably
we didn't
not.
agree on Trello? That'd be something. But
Well, then we're done. Sorry, it's you, not me. Trello's amazing.
and so, yeah. And I'm hoping, okay, so let's dive into this in terms of,
Perfect.
you know, there are a lot of yoga teachers right now having tough conversations. So let's just think back to why. Climate change, the pandemic, the US election. I don't care if you don't live in the US, it's coming for you on your news cycle. Like so many things are coming at us. The genocide happening right now to Palestinians, anti Semitism. We just had a huge wave of anti Semitism here in Canada over the last week, hit the news cycle. Like I realize it's there all the time. Racism, sexism, abortion rights, like holy.
Yes. Yes. All of it. There's so, here's what I think was one of the things that, whether or not we said this in this way last week, we started talking specifically about the genocide in Palestine. And I, I'm thinking, if it's okay if we go there and talk
Yeah.
about that,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like you wondering what my stance was on that, or if you and I were aligned in this, and we are aligned. It's genocide going on in Palestine. It's really shitty, and I feel like it's very weird that I have to say I'm anti kids dying, because who the hell is not anti kids dying? Like I don't. We don't have to cover that, but really, that's bad. Boo. We should not be pro that,
Right.
right? Yeah. But we started talking about that specific thing, and that's something that you're really passionate about, Shannon, and you shared so much on your podcast, and you're so generous with information on Instagram following that. um and so we got into it and we were talking about it, but that also is, you're right, true of the environment and cultural appropriation and racism and misogyny and homophobia and all the things.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of difficult conversations we could be
Yeah,
having. Okay. So does this belong in yoga?
of course it belongs in yoga. So stop. So
I
stop.
know your answer on this already.
Okay, yes, I'm going to say yes, and I want to talk about some parameters that you and I probably took for granted, because A, we know each other pretty well, and B, not only do we know each other pretty well, I'm just going to speak for myself, but I like genuinely like you as a person. So I'm in on this, like, in my head I define people as friends or friendly. And if you're a friend, my job is to lean into our relationship before all the other things in life that would be self-serving, right? Like I value our connection before I would value like what's good for my podcast or what's good for this or that. Like you're my friend, I want to be your friend. Friendly people don't hold the same sort of gravitas, right? Like we can be friendly, but I'm going to be like, I'm going to do, it's just business, babe. I'm going to do whatever for my business. I would consider you and I to have a friend connection. And I don't want to take that for granted, because it is easier to dive deep, I think, in somebody, with somebody who has like a relationship with you and your friends, you know? Like, would you agree? Maybe you think I'm off base, but
Oh, I no, I love that. And so you're saying like that impacted our conversation.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so if you want to have hard conversations, I think we almost shy away from the conversations with friends, and we're just gonna like, spout things to people we only kind of know a little bit. But gosh, like, don't you want to get in it with the people who like you really trust and love and have respect and all those things? Like, I've decided now, 45-year-old Rebecca has decided the rest of my life, all I'm in for is to know other people and to have them know me. And that means like I want to have those hard conversations with people who I like and respect. And I think they're interesting and funny and have a soothing voice like you, Shannon.
Okay, I really understand this, and I appreciate you saying this because you're right. Though the friendships that I have where I'm like, hey, this thing is making me feel weird, or like, I need some support in this, or sorry, I really messed up. Those moments, even though it's really uncomfortable, where you're like, ooh, now I have to admit like how I'm not perfect, which none of us are, or this feels weird, or whatever, or you just have this like humanness moment. Those after those conversations, you're like, wow, our friendship is way stronger. But on the
Yeah.
flip side of it, when it starts to go sideways, it also can mean the end of a friendship.
Yeah. Yeah. But okay, so the yoga thing, right? Aren't we in it to deeply know ourselves? And part of that is that deep connection that we have with other humans around. Like, we don't live in ashrams. Like, I don't, I have kids. I've got stuff to do. I have a job. I like employ people. Isn't that part of this is to deeply know ourselves? And as a result, we get to then also deeply know other people. That's at least my thing.
Right. For me, when I look at yoga, I just feel like the philosophy of yoga, there is social justice weaved all the way through anything I've ever learned. Like once, you know, just like basic ahimsa. Okay. If I
Yeah.
say something and it's harming someone else, my choice of words, uh, I want to learn to do better. Like that's a basic one. Yeah. And I feel like so much social justice is in that, you know, let's not hurt other people.
So if we're in yoga spaces and we're talking with other people who are yoga practitioners about like these hard topics, can we say the first step is to lean into relationships that are the strongest in those spaces? Like, talk to your yoga friends first, connect with them. And I think one of the best things about being able to have hard conversations with friends is that if you truly have like a respect, friendship connection, like the stakes feel a little bit lower because you're going to hopefully that is reciprocal and going both ways. You can practice having hard conversations with people who you know are going to be still in relationship with you at the end of those hard conversations. Like, practice with your friends.
Right. That's a really good tip. Okay. Now, what if we're like, well, I just want to show up and teach yoga and not I don't want to talk about politics in my yoga class. I
Good
get that
question.
view.
Yeah, because like I also feel like that has to be okay to some degree.
Yeah.
That has to be okay.
Because you're not showing up to like, if I decided, okay, climate change is really on my mind today. And
Yeah.
then I instead just threw out my class plan and was like, today we're going to have a lecture on climate change. Like, my students would not be happy about it.
No. And let's get into, so this is the one thing that I wanted to talk about this in our conversation, the thing I was like texting you, because I think that's also something that happened in our conversation unconsciously. Like, we both consented to it. So can we talk about what people consent to in yoga spaces to have conversations? Like, if you as a student go to a yoga class and the expectation is that your teacher is going to have that conversation or your co-students are going to have that conversation, can we talk about the fact that in order to have conversations that are difficult, all parties should consent to that conversation.
Yes. I love that you sent this to me. You were like, "Can we talk about consent?" And I was like, "For sure we can." And I don't have the answers on this because let me think of an example of like where well, I can think of an example that I shared with you earlier where I was in a class where the teacher was like, "Nobody should ever eat bacon." And I was like, "What kind of a class am I in?" Like, I don't want to hear someone's nutritional guidance for me, especially someone
Yeah.
who's not trained. Um, in a class, this should not be happening. So I would say like I did not give consent for like nutritional guidance. But also, I've had a student or I know of a yoga teacher who had a student who someone said something really rude in class and they were asked to leave the studio. And like, maybe everyone in that class didn't consent to hearing the teacher speak up and like take action right away and give a little like, here's why this is not okay. Yeah.
There's the question, right? So what do we consent to in discussion? Because I love your bacon example. That's a good one. The example I always use is your lecture on the environment because I remember I was in my 20s and I signed up for handstand workshop in like this yoga conference situation, and it was like a husband and wife team. I don't even think they teach in the yoga space anymore. And they were teaching handstands, but the first 25 minutes of a 90-minute workshop was spent lecturing people about the environment.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
just, yeah, it was very much like we feel like you've got to have connection to the earth. And then, so they're in the Midwest of the United States. And these are two teachers from California. And they're like, we're out surfing, connecting with the ocean every day. And I was like, Jesus, stop. Like, I thought we were doing handstands. Like,
Was their handstand better because of that connection to the other? Oh my gosh. Sorry. That's just me being sarcastic.
I mean, and I remember that is always my example in this. Now, I actually am a passionate environmental advocate.
Me
Like we
too.
do a lot in our space to support environmental causes in our area, but do our students consent to that when they come into our classrooms? And further, do they consent to conversations about race? Do they consent to conversations about misogyny? Do they consent to conversations about all the hard Palestine? Do they consent to those conversations? And is there a point where there's a subject matter that the stakes are so high, consent doesn't matter? I don't know, but
Yeah.
maybe. I don't know.
That's a really good question. I don't have the answers for that. I do think consent comes in. We know that with hands-on assists. It's making me think, and I told you this example on the phone, and for your listeners who don't know or mine who haven't heard the episode, there's a yoga student, Suzanne, who it was kind of the flip of like this. It wasn't the teacher. Suzanne went into a yoga space. The teacher was like, "Hey, how are you?" And Suzanne had just been watching how people in Gaza have no water. And this was before the class, it wasn't in the class. And she said, "I'm having a really tough time today. I just watched all these people like just needing basic water. And I'm looking around and I see water bottles everywhere. And I know that I have access to unlimited water if I want it. And like, I feel terrible about this." And the yoga teacher completely dismissed her, like didn't didn't respond to it. And Suzanne shared so well on the podcast what that felt like as the student. So maybe we're skipping over this isn't really well, I'm sure the yoga teacher didn't like the consent wasn't there of like
Yeah.
someone's going to come up to me and start talking to me about like Palestinians, you know.
What would you have done if you were her teacher and Palestine was either a subject that you didn't know a lot about or you didn't want to talk about? Is there a
I
way you would have answered
yeah,
differently?
I definitely hopefully depending on what the topic well for that I feel strongly that like people want to be heard. Like I would be like,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that today is feeling so difficult. Like, I hope coming to yoga offers some comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because sometimes we don't know what to say. Like, I had someone come to my yoga class and say, like, my baby just died. And you better be ready to hold space for someone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we've all had those. If you're in this industry long enough, if you've done this job long enough, that will happen to you at some point or another. Someone will come in feeling big feelings about whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And is it almost because here's my question to you. So in Suzanne's example,
Mm-hmm.
she was talking about Palestine, which is also a topic that right now feels a little bit divisive. So as a yoga teacher, does that, would we hold space for that? How do we hold space for difficult conversations if we don't want to be in them?
Right. Yeah, like if someone came out to me and they were going on like this didn't happen in a yoga space, but it was a professional who was like saying that the military is coming to round all people up. I don't share that same view. I guess if someone came up to me and I was holding space in a yoga class and they were saying like I'm terrified that the military is coming to round us up and I didn't agree with that. Or I was like, don't really I gotta get the class going here. um,
Yeah.
then I think I would say to them, like, same thing. I can hear how afraid you are. And I'm sorry that you're feeling that way. And hopefully, like, let me know if there's something that will help you feel more comfortable in today's class. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because I think both examples that you gave when you were like our pretend yoga teacher, like you did something really important, and that is you validated the person in front of you. So, like, you don't have to consent. I don't believe that even as a yoga teacher, you have to consent to every conversation that anybody wants to have. I don't believe that to be true because there can be things going on with your yoga teacher that you don't even know about. Like, look, you know, they could be doing all the stuff, right? They could have had a parent that died or they're moving or, whatever thing that you don't know that they're professional enough to not bring to class, right? Thank you for not bringing your stuff to class. But also, somebody comes in with a deep, heavy, hard conversation. You're like, okay, this is just not for me today.
Right.
Like, this is not the kind of space that I can hold today. You can still validate someone's feelings. You can still say, hey, how you feel is valid because, like, yeah, it is.
You did this really well in our conversation when I was telling you, I was like, look, I I I feel like I started to wonder where you stood on this because you weren't posting on social media. And then I said, and there were some conversations that I had where people like let me know, oh yeah, because I have Jewish friends, I'm I have to stand with them. Or I mean, one person told me flat out, I don't care about Palestinians. And I was like, and so you held space for me. Like when I was sharing those feelings with you, you were like, I am so sorry you had that experience, Jen. Like I remember that from our conversation. Um, and that's really like what it comes down to is just like to feel heard and feel like, okay, I don't care about like, not that you don't care, but like all the details are one thing, but like you really care how I'm feeling in that moment.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, of course I do. Like, and I also think that that's something that we as yoga pros can do pretty easily for other people, even if it's a subject that maybe doesn't touch our hearts as deeply as it touches somebody else's heart. I mean, there are lines though. I mean, so you said this thing when you were like a teacher said, I don't care about Palestinians, right? I don't care that they're dying, etc. immediately my brain's like, oh, your moral compass and my moral compass don't have the same true north. So, I mean, here's the hard question then. Like, all right, but now I'm going to care a little bit less about your feelings,
Right.
you
And
know?
for me, it was like, okay, now I don't feel safe with that person because
Sure.
to me, it felt like certain people, based on skin color and religion, probably have a higher priority for this person, which means to me that like my Muslim friends, my friends of color, my gay friends, my whoever might also my my loved ones might become the target of this like there are people that are more worthy in the world. Like I was like, where I don't all the ground kind of slipped out from under me in terms of and I love how you said the moral compass.
Yeah. So, okay. This is because my yoga space, because I own for those of you that don't know, I'm in the United States Midwest in Iowa. I hold a yoga studio. I own a yoga studio. I have 15 employees. We have dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of members. And I purposely hold space for hard conversations within my facility, right? um, there is a baseline. And the frank truth is, I've never, like, conversations that are arguing baseline are not conversations that are welcome. So if we want to talk about race, yes. But if you want to talk about the value of a human life based on the color of people's skins, that is off baseline. We are all valued. If you want to talk about the value of a human life or human contributions based on like gender identity or sexuality, that's off baseline. Like, look, we are all valid, we are all equal, we are all equally have the same rights to like healthcare and human rights and to be like literally alive. That's baseline. I'm not arguing with that because me arguing with that acts like that's something worth arguing about, and it's not. You're just wrong.
Right.
like,
Right.
like, like there's a lot of things I'm willing to work and say, maybe I don't know everything, maybe I could be wrong about this, but if you want to tell me that somebody's life has more or less value based on what religion they have, you're fucking wrong. Like, that's off baseline, and I'm not ready to argue with it because that acts like you have a point. Surprise, surprise, you don't.
Yeah. Well, and I also want to say to our listeners who maybe don't know you is that you're not only willing to have these these difficult conversations, uncomfortable conversations in your yoga space, you will willingly do it here on a podcast or up on a
Yeah,
stage.
yeah, yeah, anywhere, yeah.
And so that's where I was like, I felt this like, um, and can you be super honest with me and please do that?
Sure.
Like, is there some way that I'm coming across? Because I am like, here's what happens in my brain. I go have a warm shower and I think like people in Gaza can't. I go to do something with my kids, like have them over for dinner, and I'm like, I know that they're all like going to be tucked in safely to bed. My kids are all adults, but like
Yeah,
they're going to have safety, and mothers in Gaza don't feel that for their children right now. Like I can leave the country. I can
yeah,
move around in my car and not hit a checkpoint. Like this is how my brain works. And so and I and I feel like two things. One, I feel like this is a normal reaction to watching a genocide. What my brain can only compare to the Holocaust without having lived it, but just having learned it and read about it and listened to people talk about it. And apartheid, genocide, the Holocaust, and colonization, all of these things. And for me, I feel like this level of passion needs to happen across all people who care about other people. And so I come across like that. And I do it everywhere. I'm doing it like whether I go talking to a family member, friends, if I'm talking to my local politician, if I'm on the podcast, I'll watch something upsetting and I start the podcast, I do it. I do it everywhere right now. And there is a part of me that's like, Shannon, could you make this more palatable for people who it's too much for them? Like, can you be honest? Is there a way that like I should be doing it?
Okay, no. Because I think one of my favorite parts about our conversation last week sort of surrounded this idea because you are coming across incredibly passionate, but also I know you as a person and I know that you're incredibly passionate about things. Like you're a passionate person. That's who you are. I think the tension, right, that happens with other people happens when they don't have the same passion as you do. They recognize it. That brings discomfort. And in order to offset this discomfort that they're experiencing, they're either lashing out at you or deciding they don't care about an issue.
Okay.
So I think what is an interesting thing to explore is another way for people to channel discomfort because not everybody has the same level of passion as you do about the subject, but also validate that there are different ways that we can show up, and each way that you can show up is valid. When I see big picture things happening across the world, halfway across the world, which is where Palestine is from where I am, that makes me feel like I can't do anything. So, what I have learned is that I will double down on the things that I can do. So, we've got my studio is called Sunlight. We have Sunlight and Service projects. We've picked up an extra service project for the fall. I've picked up an extra book club where we can sit around and discuss a difficult book and we can have those conversations amongst ourselves because that's how I offset the suffering and discomfort that I feel because I can't do anything. And I think that the conversations that I'm interested in having are how people can take that discomfort that they experience when they're like, God, Shannon knows so much. And Shannon is so passionate about it. I don't feel that passion. And if I don't feel your level of passion, I'm wrong. And I think that's where shame, guilt, all of those feelings come in. People are experiencing that from your content. And to some degree, that's really not about you. That's about them and their feelings. Like, I'm sorry you feel the way you feel, but this is how I feel. And I'm also not afraid to share it.
This is so good to listen to. Thank you. Because I feel like I I do think, is there a better way to do this? Is there a better way to like, and I love, just so our listeners know, I also know the work that you do, that you support all kinds of community things there and all kinds of social justice um, projects in your own community, taking care of community. And I love that. And I really think that's the only answer for all of us to do on like that's up to all of us. Not that it's the only thing we can do, but like collective care is where we're going to have to be.
Yeah,
We
I agree.
can't look to, we know that we can't look to our governments from right now and be like, can you please fix this thing? Right now, even in Canada, that even though we have free healthcare, we can't always look at our healthcare system and be like, here's what I need from you. We have to really have, we have to self advocate, and then we also have to care for each other as well. Like
Yeah.
there are many systems that are struggling right now. So I guess I'm still sitting with, and I'm still going to ask myself because I think I need to continue to do so. Is there a way to share about this that doesn't automatically make someone be like, I'm shutting this down? Because
Yeah.
I had a friend who told me, Shannon, I'm worried about you. I think if you just shut the news off and go meditate, it's going to be easier.
Ooh, that's a tough. Oh, that gives me feelings, Shannon.
But you know what I mean is I'm still, because this friend cares about me. I realize that they care about me. I'm not open to listening to that right now. Like it doesn't help It didn't help. That's why you have feelings about it because, if you came to me and you were super passionate about like, hey, Shannon, we got to feed these hungry people in my community. And
Yeah.
here's what we're doing at the yoga studio. And can you help raise awareness? I'd be like, I'd either say like 100% or I really want to, but I don't know where I can fit this in. I wouldn't be like, what would be easier is if you just go cook yourself a nice meal.
Oh, that's that. Yeah, yeah. Like trying to not make awkward podcast sounds. But I mean, so yoga and meditation, yoga asana, let's call it yoga asana, is what it is. Asana and meditation have a place in regulating our nervous systems. And there is no group of people where the stakes are higher than people who are involved in social justice work at regulating our nervous systems. Because frankly, the truth is, this is a long fight. Everything's a long fight. You are only playing a long game. And while it is really nice to connect with people online and find people who believe the same thing that you believe, and then you get all those serotonin bursts of like, oh my God, so and so believes what I believe, and oh my God, I love this, and we have this new community, like all the dopamine hits that you get when you're online and you're like connecting in that way. Like every change is a long game. It is always a long game. So I love the idea of using asana and meditation to regulate your nervous systems, but that is not the solution for your discomfort and suffering at at recognizing systemic injustice. Like you can't meditate your way out of that.
Yeah.
Like you can't. And that's not useful to think that you can.
Right. That was so well said. Okay, I'm going to jump around a little bit more because I just remembered one other part of our conversation. And that was where I was like, basically saying to you, like, where do you stand on this? And you were like, of course I'm against genocide. Like, who is questioning that? And I was like, okay, this is coming from like me not seeing you post about it on social media, but I thought that, but I wasn't sure. Can we chat
Yeah,
about
let's get
that?
into that. Let's get into that. Yeah. I mean, yeah, because I think you and I also have two where we diverge is social media, right?
Yes.
Like I think this is where we're off. We are completely in lockstep, right? Because I think in pretty much everything else we are in lockstep about how we believe about this. But social media to me is my work. It is my job. And I don't post about every social justice issue because I don't. Because A, I don't believe that I have to. B, I don't believe that I'm accountable to people on social media for them to know how I feel about everything always, all the time. Social media is not the cops. And I also know that I show up for the work in my own community, and that's my priority. I hear and understand, and I totally want to validate all those people listening who are like, I don't know how to show up any other way but on social media. Like, there's also worth and value in that kind of work too. Like, what you're doing, you're always like, especially when we were in the thick of really understanding what was happening in Gaza, one thing I appreciated about your social content was like, you were editing, you were like, I don't know why I was following this person, I don't follow this person anymore, here's where I'm getting the news, here's where I'm getting my information, because we live in an age of information overwhelm, right? There's so much out there. And one thing I thought you were doing so well is figuring out where to get the information from, because I wasn't going to do that, so I was just watching you.
It's interesting you say that. I want to say that there were a lot of people who then would reach out to me and be like, I had no idea this was happening. And I was thinking, wow, how? Like, but I guess most of their accounts that they follow don't share. And then people are like, where can I learn more?
Right.
You know, and so I kept getting this validation that like me sharing on social media it's making a difference. So
Sure.
that I'm like, why isn't everyone doing this? Which I'm saying that in a sarcastic tone because social media also drains me and makes me tired and it's vague. Anyway, you and I have talked about that before.
I think it's a trick of the light. So to me, social media makes you believe you've done something when what I know based on not only my own experiences, but like having close friendships with people who are activists in my own community and other communities, is that the hard work is the grant writing. The hard work is like showing up when there's not protesters there. The hard work is figuring out who's going to clean up the mess after the protests. The hard work is going, okay, so we protested Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday until Sunday afternoon. The hard work is Monday morning when you still have to show up and still have, when you don't have 1,000 people behind you or even 50 people behind you, and you have to be like, what are the permits for the next protest? And also, did that protest impact the things that I wanted it to impact? And if it didn't, how can I create the impact and change that I want to? Is my time well spent protesting, or is my time better spent figuring out how to feed refugees that are coming here from other countries because they have no access to housing and food stamps and all the things that are getting them fed and sheltered? Like, that's the hard work. And I think social media sometimes tricks us into thinking we've done more than we've done. That being said, there's a space on social media for skillful information sharing. And from my view, you slide into that space.
I appreciate you saying that. Because there was a time also where I was like, oh, wow, I'm tipping over into like, I was sharing pretty gruesome videos because I was like, if people saw this, then they would. And then I started to be like, if you can handle it today, you can go over and see this person's story. Like it still is important that we bear witness to some degree, that we know what's happening.
Yeah.
Mm.
Will you
Oh,
tell me a little bit about your thoughts about social media? Like what your experience has been like over these last, several months since October 7th, 2023. What's your experience been like?
okay. Well, I'll tell you one thing that happens when I'm scrolling, and a lot of my feed is full of like what is happening in Palestine, but also other social justice issues. And that's, I'm going to blame, not actually blame, but blame the different trainings that I was in and the different spaces I was in where people are like, follow more people of color, follow more like queer creators, like listen to more yoga teachers talking about fat phobia. So I like, this is the circle I'm in, and I'm so grateful to these educators and to the people who are like me trying to figure it out. And then it's so bizarre when like there's something huge that happens in the news, like a massacre, let's say, and it's all children, and that's what's mostly in my feed. And then there is a yoga offering where it's like, come to this retreat where like you'll leave all your worries behind and da 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 da. And I'm just like, I just take this pause and I'm like, has this yoga teacher said anything about any social justice issue? And if not, I feel triggered. I feel like it's not actually yoga. And that's on me, like, and whatever. I can unfollow, and other people might be like, I'm going to follow them because that's what I want. I want my feed filled up with, like, I don't know. I have a lot of feelings about social media because I feel like it's been amazing right now for getting information out really quickly. It's terrible how people are being shadow banned. Like a friend tried to share a story with me yesterday and she couldn't, and I couldn't see it in her stories. And I've seen things where like there's no sound. It's the more people have been speaking up about Palestine, the more there's this like, we're not going to let you get your information through. The other thing I'm seeing is that the yoga teachers and yoga students who are in this conversation where Palestine is really important, and also so is like taking care of the earth and taking care of like trying to get out of these really oppressive systems that we've built up as humans. They care about this a lot. Like they want to go to a company now that's selling socks or yoga or whatever and see the values of that company.
Yeah.
So I think the world is changing. We had Tristan Katz and Brooke Monahan on the podcast talking about like marketing is totally different now. We don't know what we're doing
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. I like Tristan. They're great.
Yeah.
So here's something that I really want your thoughts on, because this is something, again, within my little community space. And a lot of us go into bigger community spaces, myself included, but I'm not the only one on my team that's like that. We talk about the shame that we hand each other in the social justice space. Like, you're not doing enough. You can't be in it. Like, and I think social media feeds that. I feel like there's got to be a sweet spot. And I'm thinking there's a couple people that are names, big names in the yoga space, where I now look at those people's content and I'm like, you're doing as much harm as you're doing good. Because if what you're doing is marketing shame, but your shame is wrapped in a social justice blanket versus a diet culture blanket, say, like, it's still shame peddling. And I think we have to talk about how that happens in social justice spaces. If you're not showing up in the right way, if you're not showing up enough, if you're not doing the things that you're doing, it's why I have personally been like, look, I have so many fucks to give about the things that are important to me, but the social media space, I didn't grow that garden of fucks this year. Like, I'm not, I've not got it for you. Like, it's a choice I've made. Like, I can't care about everything. I can't. Otherwise, I'm not going to show up for the things that matter to me. Can we talk about like this handing shame in the social justice space a little bit? Because it happens. And I feel like we
Oh
all
my
feel
gosh.
it.
It happens. And also, like, I don't know what else to call it other than like infighting. Like, happens really quickly. I mean, we're humans. We brush up against. We're like, also when you're in social justice spaces, people are feeling like right now, like rage and grief. Like I just watched this video that wrapped up all the climate for the last month. Like after that video, I was like we're doomed. Like that's how it
In a
feels, you know?
blanket.
So we have like
Yeah.
big feelings going on, and then we're in these spaces, and I've witnessed it. I've been in conversations where I'm like, wait, we're going in the same direction. Why are we wasting our energy here arguing about like the color of this pamphlet or something? Like,
We're all in the same car.
right?
The same goddamn car.
Okay, you said this quote. I don't know if it was on your podcast. Was it someone you interviewed? It's the quote about
Dude,
difference of
I know.
opinion.
Yeah. So it's Daniel Simpson. Shout out to Daniel. He's a yoga pro in the UK. He has his own podcast. Google him. It's great. Daniel said, yeah, on my podcast when we were talking about perfectionism, he said, "Oh yeah, your worst enemy is a person who almost thinks like you."
Right.
And I was like, oh, yeah, that's really true. Because actually, as I was having this, conversation around perfectionism in my podcast in January, February, I was asking about social justice issues too, because I think that affects it. Like, we feel like we have to be the perfect activists, or what we do is invalid. And he's like, yeah, because we're so busy fighting with that person who's almost like us, that we've like lost the plot, y'all. Like,
Right. Oh my gosh, it's so true. And that's a waste of energy. And that shame piece, I get. I get that. So like you said two things in that are making me think, and this will sit with me as like um you said that you were looking at my social media and being like, this is good. I feel like I'm like getting information here. But there were times where I was just like, if I can shame everyone into like sometimes that works. I
yeah,
remember being in a relationship with someone once and they were like, Shannon, don't do whatever recycling thing it was or organic garden thing. And there was a bit of shame to it. Like I was like learning and feeling shame. Like, why didn't I know that thing? Gosh, I'm going to do better. I want to do better. I think that was shame.
so and again, I mean, we can all choose based on whatever our moral compass and value system are, but I don't care what it is. There's no change in the world that's worth me dishing shame to other people. Shame kills somebody else slowly.
Yeah.
And I'm like it's not how I want to make my money in my business. It's not how I want to get change to happen. Like it's just not, because to me, if the only way change happens is through shame and shaming other people, that change is unsustainable.
What do you think is like super effective? Like if you and I were sitting in Gaza right now as parents raising kids, what would you want people to be doing?
Ooh, that's a good question. What I could almost answer more easily what I wouldn't want people to be doing, and what I would not want people to be doing is for white people to fight with other white people about what you should be buying from whatever small business because they do or don't believe what you believe about Gaza or Palestine. Because I'm just going to say it, I feel like you've lost the plot if that's what we're doing here. What I want, what I would want was for people to sign up for the hard stuff. What I would want was for people to sign up for figuring out how to write grants and advocate for your government and go all the way up to the top and then work your way backwards. Like, so maybe I can't affect the US presidential election, but I can affect the people who represent me in government in my local area. Because I think that, gosh, like I love big moments of sexy change, but that's not how it works. It's just never how it works. It is the form that you have to fill out on Monday morning. It is the people in your community who feel safe enough with you to have hard conversations that they can work out how they feel about something. I mean, like that's, we have to be in it for discomfort and the hard stuff. And you have to be in for social change when you don't get a dopamine hit from what you're doing or saying, when you don't feel self-righteous because you said something and you're like, I feel really great about that. And I check that in myself because I'll say stuff online or I'll say stuff in my podcast or I'll be writing stuff. And it's like, I'm now like checking for that self-righteous feeling because I also don't want to feel that way either. I just want to be in it for the hard stuff because hard stuff, it doesn't look nice. It is like beige in color. It's like Times New Roman font 11 sexy. It is not sexy, but it is how change happens. Advocate for your government and advocate for your government even when somebody's not telling you to do it. Like, there you go. And join a community of other people who are going to do that hard work too.
Yeah. The protests in my area was one of the things that like I saw really helping me feel like, oh, I don't have to explain myself to these people. These people
Yeah.
also wake up thinking about the children of Gaza, or like it's on their mind all the time. And we found ways, like we went to a barbecue for our local politician who kept ignoring our emails or sending really weird responses back. And we held a small vigil outside the barbecue. And a few people who were attending the barbecue came up to our group at the end and said, this made a great impact. You really got your message across in a very peaceful, profound way. Like,
Yeah.
phew.
So I also am really, I just want to talk about the protest for a second because I think that protesting is really important, but there's a both and here is that peaceful protests where you are not leaving garbage everywhere because like I really want to talk about the efficacy of protesting and how actually a lot of protesting that happened around Gaza is around what, and there is a Harvard professor, I will look up his name, who talks about what are called luxury values. And it is the values of primarily upper middle class white people for things like defund the police and protesting, pro Palestinian protesting, who then go to protest and leave garbage everywhere for poor brown folks to have to clean up, while simultaneously also saying they're advocating for those people. And so I feel like that's also something I'm on the lookout for, if what I believe is a luxury value, or if I'm treating it like it's a luxury value versus something that I'm truly passionate about and I want to advocate for having change about.
Yeah. Just to be clear, our protests are usually like 30 to 50 people.
Yeah.
And there's
You're
definitely
seeing
no
this on,
garbage. The only thing we
yeah.
left were flowers at our vigil. But I can see how a massive protest would create that.
Those college campuses, that was what they left garbage in their wake. But also they did at Standing Rock too, when they were up protesting for clean water at Standing Rock. The amount of garbage that was left there after Standing Rock is just, I mean, it might as well have, like Burning Man cleans up better, y'all. Like, if we're
Now, for
telling,
me in that moment, then I feel like, okay, these are people who, like, because we're talking about massive protests and the student protests, like, they protested for Vietnam, which, was
yeah,
really valid. And now, like, reflecting back and knowing the history of the war in Vietnam, we realize even more. It feels a bit like I feel like if I was a mother in Gaza and I didn't feel safe or my children were dying, I wouldn't care about the garbage left after a protest. I would want everyone to be like walking out from their life and stopping everything in their power, just being like, that's it. We're not doing this. But like
I don't
I
think
would
that's
want,
true.
because the minute I earn a dollar, my government in Canada and your government in the US they're going to take part of my dollar and buy weapons that are bombing children. And I just think we as the people really hire these politicians, like, who are making these decisions. If we all said, we're not doing this, we're all walking out, we're done, it'd be over. Like, that's what it feels like to me the protest is.
So, okay, I actually think, I know you. I think you wouldn't be like that, because I think humans aren't like that. I think that no matter how difficult the circumstances, you will always say, how are you? How are you doing? I feel like we can struggle and care at the same time.
Right.
I do think people, even in the worst of circumstances, even the worst of circumstances in our countries, can struggle and care, because honestly, caring about other things makes your own personal struggle feel a little bit less, like when you're taking a bigger worldview.
True.
Like, I think we can do both. I think it's so human to do both. That's why humans are freaking awesome. Like, think of all the things we care about every single day.
Yeah, there's this video that moved me so much this week, and that was uh this farmer and his friends going to the north of Gaza and distributing tiny seedlings of plants and being like, here, like,
Saw
this
that
is
video.
this is the way we hold on to this land.
Yeah.
This is us saying we're not leaving. This is us being like, we're going to grow food here. This is to starving people. Like, this
Yeah.
tiny little seedling, like, this takes a lot. I was like, because I had all these obstacles in my mind of gardening, of like, oh my gosh, there's so many weeds. I have so much to do, blah, blah, blah. And then I watched this video and I was like, I'll be fine over here pulling a few weeds. I'm not trying to grow a garden in a cage being bombed. Yeah.
I think what I still think there's joy in gardening, though, no matter where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah. The people who were receiving the plants, and that's why it was so moving. I
It's
keep coming back to I feel like the majority of Canadians, Americans, people in the UK, Australia, maybe they don't really know what life is like right now in Gaza for people. I don't, but maybe some people are choosing not to see what's actually happening.
I mean, I think, I'm only going to speak for Americans. We have wild amounts of privilege, but also wild amounts of class difference between the poorest of us and the richest of us. It's huge, staggeringly huge compared to other countries. I also feel like we don't have anything to compare it to except the stories that we are told about how bad things were. And those stories are often put where the worst of the worst, the most extreme examples are given. And we don't understand that there's also space for people to be human in hard times too. Like, I used to teach yoga at a domestic violence shelter, right? In the years that I did that, I couldn't really talk about it. It's the deal. If you go into domestic violence spaces, typically you can't talk about it because that makes the women and children there unsafe, et cetera, right? And people would want to donate to domestic violence shelters would donate like these big boxes and bags of stuff, and it would be like sheets that had holes in them and blankets that maybe weren't very nice. And the mentality is, well, people have nothing, these people have nothing, so I'll give them whatever it is. And there's like a dignity to allowing people to have standards and say, I don't want your sheets with holes in them, like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I also want to make sure that I personally don't get trapped in this idea that it's the saddest person in the room trap, like, so we're looking for the saddest person in the room and we're going to help the saddest person in the room because that makes us feel better. And when it just, I think it's a trap because nobody wants to be, as a person who's been in many trauma informed spaces and been the saddest girl in the room when people have shared their history and their trauma, and I'm like number one all the time. It's a shitty place to be. Nobody wants to be number one of the saddest people in the world. Like, I I don't.
Right. I know what you're saying about like I remember going to a circle for parents of premature babies, feeling like I was the saddest person in the room. And it wasn't until I heard other people's stories where I was like, okay, I'm good. I don't even have to come back. Like,
Yeah,
I'm sorry
yeah,
I even shared. And I'm grateful to all of you. Thank you. Bye.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. I don't know how to summarize that. Here's the other thing with difficult conversations is there's a lot that it spins around in our brains as humans.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think? What do you think that what would you say to the yoga teacher who's like, I really care about this. I see that this is a genocide happening. I see the apartheid, the ethnic cleansing, the horrific thing that is happening to people in Palestine. Or I see this other thing like and
Right.
I don't know if I want to show up on social media. And I do want to practice yoga off the mat. Like, what do you know, where do we start to step in and do the hard work?
I think my answer to that person every time is head down, get to work. Put your nose, get your head down and get to work on whatever it is you want to build. And that's true of like if you want to build a business or you want to build a yoga teaching career, or you want to affect change in your local government, or you want to affect change on a national or international scale. Like, the answer is the same. Get your head down and get to work. It's going to be hard and you're going to feel so like I saw this one, like, when the Olympics were being shown, and there's all these like inspirational memes about like how you get to be an Olympian, how you get to be following your dreams and do these amazing things. And the like most of them were like eye rolling, sort of Tony Robbins kind of stuff. But
Right.
there was one that was like, if you're doing what you truly are meant to be doing, that is your passion, that is what you want to do, about 30% of the time it feels great. 30% of the time it feels okay, and 30% of the time, or a third of the time, it feels bad. Sue, I think the most important thing I can tell you is that sometimes it feels bad, no matter what it is. Like it'll feel bad sometimes, but get to work
Right.
and get to work through the bad stuff. Because sometimes you'll get that euphoric high of like getting in a room with 30 other people who are standing outside doing a candlelight vigil, and you're like, oh my God, I don't have to explain myself to these people. Like, what a relief.
Yes.
In that moment, I'd be like, oh, this is why I'm here.
Yeah.
But there's the other stuff too. There's the times where you're like, I feel mad, but I feel okay. It feels okay. Like I feel like I'm still on the journey.
Right. Or this sucks. I
Yeah.
want to be blissfully ignorant again. Let's go back to that. Yes.
Yeah. Of course. Of course. Like, look, it's not going to feel good all the time. Like, change doesn't feel good all the time. Also, as a business owner, I promise you, business ownership does not feel good all the time. The last time you and I reported a podcast, we were talking about trying to quit this stupid job because it doesn't feel good all the time. Like,
Yes.
it doesn't.
Oh gosh, it's always so good to hear from you and to talk to you and pick your brain about this. I'm going to have more to think on. I hope our listeners like reach out if they have thoughts on this. And the other thing I want to say is around the consent or maybe before the consent, especially if you're having these tough conversations with friends, is like do check in with them.
Yeah.
You know, I had someone reach out to me to say like this social justice yoga teacher like isn't saying enough right now. And I was like, just so you know, like I'm friends with that person and they have some big stuff going on in their life. Like this, like, please also know. And I have friends who have been speaking out about Palestine, and they're like, you know what? I have to take a complete break from social media. I'm like, you take care of you. And I have felt that way. So maybe start there. Maybe like meet
And can
someone.
I
Yeah.
just say, as a person who has also had a lot going in her on in her life in the last 6 months or a year or so, 6 months for sure, I also beg of you to slide away from the narrative that anybody else you follow online owes you an explanation about their life. Like, I like please, I beg of you to get away from that idea that and for yourself too, that like because I do think that also happens is people in social justice spaces feel like they owe everybody else who follows them on social media an explanation about why they are or are not talking about a certain thing. You don't owe anybody anything. Again, may I reiterate, social media is not the cops. Like you don't owe people an explanation about your personal life. You just don't, because you can be a person too.
Right. So true. Also, let us know if you have this all figured out. We'd love to hear from you.
Please figure this out for us. We'll have you on the podcast to just listen. We're just going to listen to what you have to say.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for this and for your friendship and for the work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you. You're the greatest. I love our friendship. I love that we got to reconnect. Thank you for sending me that message on social media and your lovely voice on your voice memos that I'm never going to send again.
Do the voice memos. Let them be messy. Thank you for saying, because you're the first one that said, we should do a podcast about this. And I was like, this is why we're friends. Let's let everyone listen in on our mess.
Yeah, be messy in your yoga spaces too, but be messy with consent and be messy with love and be messy with grace.
Yeah, I agree. Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening this far, my friends. And thank you, Shannon, for being on the podcast and agreeing to record this with me, because as y'all heard, it was my idea. Here are our key takeaways. First, there are a lot of ways to have a hard conversation, but don't take for granted the powerful act of having hard conversation with your friends. Friends are folks who you prioritize your connection with over other self serving things. Now, people who you are friendly with don't hold the same weight or gravitas in your relationship with them. So, for example, you can be friends with your cousin, and that relationship is really important. But the relationship you should have with your boss, that's a friendly one. Next, Hard conversations and social justice conversations do belong in yoga. There's a lot of discourse in our industry around this, and amazing folks like Anjali Rao, who's been on the podcast, was talking about this very thing. But consider also this: if yoga can be a process of knowing yourself and others, then hard conversations are a part of that process. Next, consent in conversations is an absolute must, must, must. Everyone needs to be consensual for conversations to flourish, and pushing other people into conversations or expecting everyone to respond to things that are top of your mind isn't always appropriate. These conversations can be had in yoga spaces, but only when everyone is an enthusiastic yes, because we all know everyone has more fun when that happens. Next, change happens in the quiet. I know I've said that before, but it is worth repeating. If you want change to happen, don't just show up shouting. Show up to write the permit, arrange the transport, and apply for the grant. Next, what is your relationship with social media? As I said, I use social media exclusively for business and work. I have primarily yoga conversations on quite literally every one of my channels, including my personal ones, but maybe you use social media differently. Please make sure you are conscientious about it though, and don't feel pressured to perform on social if that just isn't how you show up as a person. Now, next week, I'm going to do an overview of this project that I've been working on for the past few weeks: the future of yoga therapy. A few of us started a Facebook group, and we are having hard conversations and industry changing ones in that Facebook group right now. Now, let's get back to work, my friends, and I will catch you around the water cooler on our break time next week.